Hi, sweeties. How are you doing? Welcome to Seminary. Thank you so much for the support. Hope you all are doing great. So, I came across this video of a young black man talking about how dealing with racial trauma is like really very sad and all that. And I am going to say this: parents, it is your duty to know to know where your child is schooling, to know how safe and how it impacts his or her mental health. Why am I saying this? I am saying this because there are some questions kids ask themselves at tender age that we never, one thing about life is that anything a child learn at a tender age sticks. And when it sticks, it takes so much time for it to leave. Some of them they have to unpack, go for therapy and all that for them to get themselves back. It is something that I keep telling people. Make sure that your kids are in a place where they are supposed to be, where they are supposed to see people that look like them, not something that they end up in therapy in the end and they start going through it. You are a parent and you should know better that where your child is or is schooling impacts him or her positively or negatively. So the choice is yours. Let's get into this video.
I just feel like there's a severe lack of research, empathy, and discussion about what it's like to grow up as a Black kid in predominantly white, super racist environments, especially in those early formative years, and moreover, how to navigate that kind of trauma. It's extremely complex, difficult to correct for, and oftentimes, very ironically, being reified and replicated by the same people who lack empathy for the products of this exact system. And a tinge of resentment not dissimilar to the one that I feel when people are like, oh, you articulate yourself well and explain yourself so well in other situations, also exists when I explain this particular lived experience. There's no shortage of pats on the back and congratulations and empathy for my experience because I'm able to articulate it so well, and because I was fortunate enough to take so many steps to understand myself and those experiences and kind of just lend myself greater perspective on it, right? But like, what if I didn't? I don't really have to wonder because you see it all the time. People who grow up in these sorts of environments and develop a sort of Stockholm syndrome and fully internalize these pathologies. I don't think there's enough discussion about how to call in, deal with, and heal these sorts of individuals who are in the sunken place, if you will, or coons. Coon being a much wider umbrella than I think we care to admit. But yeah, the sunken place, Jordan Peele offers no solutions about how to free someone from the sunken place, if memory serves, and get out. The only solution is to get out before it's too late. And operating from that assumption, we can see placing a Black child in a non-Black racist environment without sufficient access to community as a form of death, an irreversible process, which I think is kind of a problematic view, but ultimately lines up with how we treat it. Racial or cultural zombies, as it were. And it's not a binary experience, but I think sometimes we tend to treat it like it is one. And moreover, have less empathy for people who are a little bit further on that scale, who don't even have an awareness of the fact that they are in that situation. Moreover, the moment of burgeoning awareness for people who grow up in this kind of context, especially if this moment happens later in life, is usually a result of them fucking up by saying some dumb shit. And those moments are oftentimes not met with empathy and cause that person to double down on the pathologies and ideologies that they've been fed over the course of their childhood, or to emerge from their Stockholm syndrome and realize the extent to which they need to reprogram themselves and how late in the game it is. So what does that person do? Again, especially someone who realizes these things super late in their life, relatively speaking. And again, it's the lack of empathy and solutions for this specific dilemma. I saw this snippet the other day from Joe Budden's podcast where Mark Lamont Hill was the featured guest. And, all the co-hosts of the podcast had this really dumb argument about interracial dating, specifically Black women dating non-Black men. And Mark Lamont Hill was trying to talk sense into them. But in his argument, which was basically that it's different when Black women date outside of their race as opposed to Black men, which I agree with, like the context is usually not the same. And we don't even have to discuss that. We know what that's about. But in making that argument, he made a quick asterisk and said, except for Black kids that grow up in white schools and don't love Black people. And I thought that was like a really dismissive and blanket statement to make, that everyone, despite the fact that all these people were vehemently disagreeing with each other and the fact that Joe Budden and his co-hosts were being idiots, that was a point that everyone just blanket agreed with. Again, it's treated as a form of death that one cannot return from. I feel like the environments that I was educated in were supposed to kill me spiritually, mentally, generationally. I feel like that is what they were supposed to do. And they enticed my bloodline, if you will, into those spaces with the promise of upward mobility. And my rejection of those spaces and the trajectory my life has taken, I think seem a bit dramatic to those around me because they don't understand like how intensely and actively that rejection had to take place. I realized that it all had to be rejected because again, it's just like you try to keep these morsels and it grows, it proliferates, it metastasizes. But yeah, to be frank, I sometimes don't feel comfortable to share with people this is my lived experience, my early childhood experience, because there's a certain condemnation and stigma that comes along with it. Aren't you supposed to be dead? Like you're spiritually dead, right? Like it's a wrap. It's not true. It's not that simple, and it shouldn't be treated like a miracle. Like the response to Jesus coming back from the dead shouldn't have been like, I don't believe it. It should have been, okay, well, how'd you do it? Like, how do we replicate this and disseminate this so that we can save lives? And obviously, within the context of the Bible, his solution is the gospel. But to complete the analogy, what is the gospel that we are offering people who have been sacrificed in this way? By us, I might add, by us. You can't blanket condemn people who have these lived experiences or act ignorantly because of these lived experiences, while at the same time touting these desires for generational wealth. Because in the context of America, race and capital are tied up for everyone of every race. So at the same time that people are expressing all this empathy and admiration for my perspective on things, et cetera, like there are people, because Daniel Caesar commented, right? And like he had a whole controversy or whatever, maybe related to lived experiences, and he apologized. And he's since like put in effort to learn from those experiences. And yet all the comments underneath his comment were like, we still don't trust you. Like, get out of here. The dissonance can't be ignored. The dissonance cannot be denied. I'm sorry, it just can't. And the deep irony is the more aware, that is to say, the more work that has been done to undo all of this trauma, the more aware one is, the more one is inclined to feel like I'm not in a position to, for instance, have kids. It's like there's so much internalized trauma that I know in some way, shapes, and forms could potentially be passed on to my children. And like, you know, that is true for everyone, right? Trauma is part of life. But, you know, having an acute awareness of that, in a sense, can kind of feel like a form of sterilization. And it cannot be escaped. And I think it's also tied up in the conversation about biracial identity that was happening earlier this year. This whole whitewashed black people, you can leave. Go, please, by all means, go procreate with non-black people or whatever. As a black person, for the most part, a fully black person is going to have a black child. It doesn't matter who they have a child with. Yes, that child could be biracial. They're still black. And for the most part, they will still exist in the world as a black person. So there is no way to mitigate the damage or the generational trauma that stems from people who have this lived experience and choose to separate themselves further from their identity and culture. And in fact, it would only be exacerbated in that situation. So, you know, in my mind, the only solution ultimately, although calling out may be an important part of the process, is to call people into community. The pole of blackness must be stronger than the pole of whiteness, ideologically speaking. But again, I think the complexity of any viable solutions is hard to understate. It's like the psychological damage, especially at that young age, is just so hard to navigate through. It's like proverbial surgery, really, when you think about it. And we need to have more discussions if we want to have any hope of offering solutions to people who have this kind of lived experience. Again, I'm extremely proud of the way that I've turned out, even if people don't understand, because it's like, oh, you've had every privilege. Like, you just don't understand the level of reprogramming required. You just don't understand. But even in the best case scenario, I feel that the damage has to be lived with. It can't be completely eradicated. So let's have those conversations, one. And two, be real and honest with ourselves about the ways that we are continuing to create this problem for ourselves.
This is all I got from this video. And I am going to say this. I have been talking about parents helping their kids to avoid some future trauma and all that. Why am I saying this? I am saying this because as a mother or father, you are supposed to think about your child first before doing some certain thing, especially looking for accommodation or places to move to. I have said this in several times on this platform that when you are putting your child in a school and all that. Your child should be the first person to be considered before any other person. I am saying this because I have seen so many Black people coming out to talk about how going to predominantly or living in predominantly white WP environment really got them all messed up and ended up sending them to therapy upon therapy upon therapy. And some of them, all trauma is something people shouldn't live like, should I see? I know there are some things I would not want my children to experience, right? Some of you do it probably because you wanted to a better place for your child and all that. But sincerely speaking, there are some places are not better. Make sure that when you are sending your child to school, make sure that they see people that look like them. People that look like them is very important, especially America, that you know that race is something that they do not joke with. I have seen so many of them saying that they have been from one therapy to another, from one therapy to another, because they are looking for peace. They are looking for comfort. I remember sometime last year, a young Black boy that was just working on his around his neighborhood, right? That was racially profiled in a very bad way. That they almost pupil this young man, and thank goodness that one thing to another, happened that made the person that went to bring out the pupil to stop. So what if that had happened? It would have been like we moved to a predominantly all white space to to just give my child a comfort. And I'm not saying you shouldn't live in a nice place. There are so many nice, beautiful places where you can also see people that look like you. Send your kids to schools where they will not get to the school, and all they are asking themselves, why do I look the way I look? Why is my nose like this? Because it is at tender age that they start asking all those questions, and they keep asking it till they get to a certain age. It takes grace for them to know that, man, I shouldn't be hating myself. There are so many people that I know that went to some kind of school that come out, they tell you that I never liked the way I am. I never was proud of my hair. My eyes were I was so insecure because my nose, if you are seeing people that look like you all have the same nose. You all look alike. You won't be asking yourself, why is my hair nappy? Or why am I wearing braids? Or why am I wearing locks? You won't have all these questions to ask. So please do yourself good by making sure that your child mental health is in order. Bye for now.